I really want to thank everyone that's agreed to serve on the panel this evening. I know that Joan's done a great job in recruiting a very diverse panel. So I want to really extend a welcome and thank you to you all for being willing to participate this evening. I'm really excited. We've been looking forward to this session for a while, and so I'm really excited for what we have in store. So what we're going to be doing this evening is we're going to be going through a set of questions that we've been polling some residents and some of the Sports Medicine Resident Council officers. And so we're going to be talking about some general questions. And then after that, we're going to go through, and as we go through the session, if there's any questions that residents have in mind, please put them in the chat, and Joan can help me out, and we can ask those questions throughout the session or towards the end. And then at the end, we're gonna have each of the panelists go through and give us some final takeaways about what they'd recommend for each of the applicants applying this cycle. So first of all, I want to go ahead and introduce each panelist this morning or this evening. And so if you can go ahead, and we're going to start from left to right here, starting at the top. If you can go ahead and please introduce yourself. And for the fellowship directors, if you can please tell us which program you're the fellowship director for and what primary specialty you're representing. And then we'll go down and work our way down to the fellows, and we'll keep that same format going. So we'll go ahead and start with Dr. Batten here.
Oh, hi, Casey Batt. I'm the fellowship director at the Curlin Job Institute in Los Angeles.
I'm Steve Daly, the fellowship director of the University of Cincinnati Sports Medicine program.
I'm Chris Jordan. I am a co-director at the South Bend Notre Dame Fellowship, Primary Care Sports Medicine, Family Medicine.
Hi, I'm Jackie Kiefer. I am the fellowship director at Community Health Network in Indianapolis, Indiana, and I am in family medicine background.
Hi, I'm Lauren Porras. I am the fellowship director at Vanderbilt University, and I am internal medicine trained.
Jake on?
Not sure if Dr. Sellen's here yet.
All right, I can go if you want, Josh. So Jason Zaremski, I am not a fellowship director. I'm core faculty for University of Florida, but I believe I'm on tonight with Dr. Ben, as we are also the co-fellowship committee directors for AMSSM on the board. And I'm PM&R.
Hi, I'm Mike Cohen. I'm a Army PM&R doc, currently a fellow at UC Davis.
I'm Hunter Haley. I was family medicine trained. I'm currently a fellow at the American Sports Medicine Institute in Birmingham.
I'm glad you're not muted, or if you are muted.
Hi, I'm Adrienne Law. I am an incoming fellow at the Inova Fairfax Medical Campus in Fairfax, Virginia.
Hey, I'm Jackie. I'm an incoming fellow at University of South Carolina, and I'm internal medicine trained.
Hi, I'm Kaylee Noble-Taylor. I'm a PGY4 at Mayo Clinic right now and about to start sports medicine fellowship at Harvard's program at Spalding.
I'm Brooke Pfister. I am an incoming fellow at Northwestern Lurie Children's for pediatric sports medicine, and I'm pediatrics trained.
Hi, everyone. I am Kayla Campbell. I am an incoming sports med fellow at Allegheny General in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and I am emergency medicine trained.
Hi, everyone. My name is Matt Wise. I am family medicine trained at University of Washington and then the incoming fellow at University of Utah.
Great. Thank you all for being here. We really appreciate it. I guess I didn't even introduce myself at the very beginning. I apologize about that. I'm Joshua Romero. I'm this year's AMSSM Sports Medicine Resident Council President. I'm a current PM&R resident at Mayo Clinic. I'll be applying this cycle. I also want to thank Joan Brown, who's been very pivotal in organizing this event. And so I really want to thank her. I also want to thank all the Sports Medicine Resident Council officers who helped put this session together. So I really want to thank all of you for your time and effort so far. So what we're going to do as we move forward, there's going to be I try to split this up into some general questions and the more specific. I'm going to direct some of these more towards the outgoing or incoming fellows, and then some of these more towards the fellowship committee members, or the fellowship program directors. So we'll get started here. So when it comes to personal statements, what's the optimal length that you'd recommend? And what I'd like for us to do is, if we can try to have each of the panelists talk at some point during the evening, that would be ideal. There's going to be some, for each question, we could probably have 1 or 2 people give their input, and then we'll move on to the next question, just in the interest of time.
Okay, thank you.
So if somebody wants to tackle this first question, and this will be directed more towards the program directors.
Josh, I'll go ahead and start. Steve Daly at University of Cincinnati. And just from a length standpoint and from a content standpoint, one of the things, the length is not, a page, page and a half, to get concise and just what your interests are in sports medicine. The other thing that from a content standpoint, everybody, not everybody, but most people that's got going into sports medicine, you hear the same old story. I was an athlete, I got hurt, got me interested in medicine, blah, blah. That's, everybody is in that situation. What we really kind of want to see is kind of what separates you. I mean, what your desires are to in the future as far as sports medicine, what your desires are working with student athletes, and what kind of where you see yourself down the road in sports medicine. Like I said, everybody has the same, not everybody, but a lot of people have the same back history, and it's kind of, tiring to hear over and over. I sprained my ankle, I didn't get to compete, so I went into sports medicine. It's, like I said, we've all done that. So it's kind of a little bit more personal than that, and what your goals are, and what your desires are, and what your expectations in practicing sports medicine.
Yeah, and that, just to build off of that, this is Jackie Kiefer. I think that what I have advised a lot of people is make it something I can't read in your CV. You're giving me your CV, you've given me your application. Tell me something I can't see. And highlight your experiences, and that's all wonderful, but like, show me your passions, tell me about what you're looking for and kind of what your goals are, like was already said. And me personally, I would say don't go over a page. I think that you don't really want to be, you really don't, I mean, again, it's just, be concise, be to the point, but definitely this is your opportunity to let your personality and kind of your yourself shine through.
And this is Chris Jordan, Notre Dame. If I could just add one last thing to that, I would agree with those previous points. But I also think it's an opportunity.
Notre Dame program director seems awesome.
I would add that this is an opportunity for you to lean into any red flags, any concerns that you want to address. This is kind of your opportunity to acknowledge those things and maybe explain yourself, especially if you're trying to get to that interview opportunity to maybe speak on it more.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate all of your input. So I guess with that being said, over the years, what have you found to be the most common mistakes? So I think we've talked about some of them, but any other mistakes that come to mind beyond that's already been mentioned?
Hey, Josh.
We do not have a gallbladder patient.
Hey, Josh, it's Jason Zaremski. So, we do a similar thing that we're running tonight at the annual.
No, not that I know of.
If the people who are on the panel, if you would mind, please muting.
So one thing that traditionally comes up over and over again for applicants, definitely it's your time to shine. Be proud of what you've done, but please make sure whatever you put down, make sure it's accurate and it's ethical. Don't, put something down that's not accurate. You may think that what I'm saying could not be true. Every year, there's certain applications where we all know each other, program directors, core faculty, we all know each other. So if there's a concern of something on an application at, let's say, at Dr. Batten's fellowship, I'll text them and go, hey, what do you think of Dr. Romero? Like, who's Dr. Romero? So we talk to each other. So I would strongly advocate, do not say anything that is not accurate, because you will be caught at some point. It goes without saying, but please don't do that to yourself.
All right, yeah, really appreciate that. So if we think about the application as a whole, and we think about the personal statement, how important is that relative to the entire application?
Hi, Josh. This is Lauren Porras from Vanderbilt. What I usually say is that the personal statement is a really great opportunity to make your application shine, but it also is a way for you to actually tank your opportunities. And so with just echoing with what Jason said, you just really have to be careful. I've seen some pretty remarkable things over the years, offensive statements, like Jason was saying, things that weren't true. And then also too, personal statements that are things that you should look out for, like directed for other fellowship programs, describing other interests that obviously are not applicable for the fellowship program that you're applying for. So things like that, just proofreading, making sure that you're not saying anything that's considered to be unethical or controversial, and really just promoting yourself as a person. And this can be a really great opportunity to make your application shine.
And just to tag on to that really quickly, I think the other thing is that just have someone proof it for you. There's always those little things like just details and things like that. Have someone glance over it. I don't think anyone's going to be completely the grammar police or anything like that, but a polished personal statement is always a good thing.
I appreciate that. That's okay. That's helpful. And I guess another question that comes to mind is, how important is it for people to personalize a personal statement? So if they have several programs they're highly interested in, would you recommend that people personalize let's say the last paragraph of personal statement for your program? How do you view that?
The reason I would recommend against it kind of tags on to what Lauren and Jackie talked about, that oftentimes people may earmark the wrong programs. And so then you get to a bottom of someone's personal statement, it's not really geared at your program, it can turn you off. There's other ways you can reach out to that program separate from the personal statement, so you can make sure that it is individualized and tailored to that program.
Any thoughts about that? If not, we can go ahead and move forward. For those in the audience, if you wouldn't mind, please mute your microphone here. Okay, let's keep moving forward here. So when we start thinking about the activities and experiences portion of the application, so a question is, how many activities should we be listing and how far back should we go? So should we be including activities from medical school?
I would say, Josh, it's not necessarily for you to list all different experiences from medical school, but if you really did something that was spectacular or something that was life-changing during medical school that really kind of formed or molded you into the person that you are, I think that is something that is really helpful for the review committees and the fellowship directors to know. But things in terms of your academic standing, different rotations that you did, we get all of that information from your medical school transcripts. And so it's not necessary to necessarily rehash that on your application.
Steve Daly from UC. I just kind of echo that, something that's, really kind of standing out from medical school. One of the things that we like to see is your ability to get out and actually do the coverage and the sports coverage. I think there's a problem whether we're going into from a fellowship standpoint, and we're going in from an athletic training standpoint, we're going in from a different career, going into something. If we don't really get a good idea of what it's all about, if you don't really know what standing on the sideline is because you haven't had the opportunity, and then you get in the fellowship and we're going to have you stand on a lot of sidelines and you get frustrated by that, that's kind of on you, right? So what we like to see is what kind of experience you have. I think there's some specialties that it's easier to do some fellowship because you have programs that your faculty in your program are team doctors, so you can go out there. Sometimes emergency medicine, it's real tough because there's not as much faculty, but getting out there and actually, and especially in the programs, like our program is very high in coverage, okay? I'm an emergency medicine program. I'm an emergency physician. I'm going to teach you how to be a sideline doctor. To be a sideline doctor, you got to be on the sideline. So I want to make sure that you know what you're getting into and kind of show me that type of coverage, that type of activities that you've done. And just to answer another, I mean, anything academically, whether it's research in a different field or anything else, those are all important because obviously we want to make sure that you're able to do the academic work and the potential research and everything else we want to get into.
Yeah, thanks for answering all those. It's really helpful insight. Anybody else have any other thoughts on any of these questions?
Casey Bad from Curl and Job in Los Angeles. I would echo everything that's been said thus far, but one of the biggest things that I'm looking at in an applicant is that they didn't become interested in sports medicine just in the last 6 months of their third year of residency. And so I definitely think that if there's something germane to sports medicine that occurred in even undergrad, I would go back as far as possible to show sort of when that interest started and that you had a longitudinal experience from whenever that started through your application process. So, and also to go back what Jason said, be accurate, make sure you're not misrepresenting your experience. We don't expect you to have all these robust experiences early on, but if it's something germane and sparks your interest, I'd definitely include that, including academic activities in fields outside of sports medicine. I definitely think if it's significant, I like to see that. And in terms of lifting sports coverage, I'll just jump ahead to the third question. Like we were talking about, some programs have a lot of this stuff built into your programs, and it's easy to have a big long list. And there's some people who don't have easy access to sports coverage, and you may not have all that much. Again, I don't want to see a bullet point of 12 different individual games you've covered. It's nice to say, I did high school football coverage these years, this many games, this many training rooms, physicals, et cetera. I think I would try to, group them as much as possible. But that's going to be different for everybody.
Hey, Josh, there's a really good question just put into the chat. So I don't know if you want us to address it now about the coverage and, ramifications secondary to COVID, or do you have a slide for that later on?
No, I was going to try to pull that into this section. So that'd be great to answer.
So this is, this is my opinion. And I think there's a couple things that need to take into account. One, definitely, this is your opportunity in at least maybe a couple sentences in your personal statement to explain that. If you're in a state that is has been more open, as an example, where I practice, whatever your politics are, we never closed. So there's more opportunity for coverage versus maybe a state that was maybe a little bit different from Florida, a northeastern state or West Coast or whatever the case may be. Everyone understands that. Everyone is going through it in a different way. Now, that said, if you can explain that you couldn't cover or be a resident team physician for an entire season, but you got to cover 2 games or you got to cover, one wrestling, something. We want to see that you figured out a way to cover something, but take advantage of your personal statement and use 2 or 3 lines to explain as a result of the pandemic based on where I practice. Everything was shut down, which we know in 2020. And unless you're at the professional level and in the bubble or something, there weren't a lot of opportunities again until 21 or 22 in various parts of the country. We all understand that. So instead of making it a negative, turn around, make it a positive. in the absence of being able to do that, I helped write a paper with 3 attendings on this topic related to X. So, instead of just making a negative, turn the negative into a positive. But, my opinion, and I'd be curious what the other panelists think is, explain that. We're all aware of and very intimately of what's gone on the last couple of years. Take advantage of that for a couple sentences and it'll come out in the wash. We're aware of that.
Yeah, Jason, I agree with you completely in that situation. Like you said, we're in the Midwest. We really didn't shut down, but even in our conference, the Mid-American Conference with at Miami University, Illinois and New York were in much different situations than we were in Ohio. But I mean, it made sports medicine a lot different, especially being able to get out and do coverage. You guys may have been limited on what your institution would allow you to do. Certain rotations you weren't able to do because you couldn't get by the COVID restrictions. But just kind of let us know that hopefully as we go forward and we get into a more endemic situation with COVID, that won't be as much of a problem in the future. But especially with the residents or the fellows that are coming in or applying for the next cycle, explain that, because you missed some opportunities. And the guys that are coming in as fellows, you missed almost 2 years of potential opportunities. So, I mean, we understand that.
Yeah, I would completely agree. And I would just say that, lost opportunity isn't lost time. And so you still had time. How did you fill that time? You can explain that. There are a lot of online videos, different things that you can use as added tools that you can say, hey, I spent my time dedicated to sports medicine in this way. I think that still speaks to your intent and the efforts you made to try and attain a fellowship.
Just one last point on this I'll add, because I was in this boat last year applying and I had very limited sideline coverage because of COVID, but also because your electives got stolen and then you're in the ICUs. But I was able to use the time from when I submitted my application to when interview started in October. So at least, even though it wasn't on my application, I was able to answer that question a little bit better come that time.
And the only other thing that I was going to add to kind of snowball on what Chris said is that, and this is the case in the case of COVID and sports coverage, but this is also how we look at different opportunities that different applicants have that are coming from different subspecialties and different programs, because we are very aware that there's a huge amount of variety in terms of sports exposure, not just related to COVID, but related to other opportunities within your health system. So we're very aware of that as fellowship directors and as program directors. One of the things that really makes an applicant shine is if an applicant is adaptable and resilient. And so what I would say to you is that if you feel like your opportunities were really negatively impacted by COVID, this is a really great opportunity to demonstrate to us how you adapted and you became more resilient because of that adversity, because that is something that we look for in candidates.
Well, that was a great dialogue, and really appreciate everyone's input there. I think in just the interest of time, we'll keep pushing forward, but that was a great discussion. So I think we've already briefly talked about this, but it sounds like the general consensus is if you've done any scholarly work, you should list all publications. I guess one question to follow up as part of that would be, let's just say you've submitted your application and now you're coming into your last year residency. How important is it to stay involved in new scholarly work? Should you be seeking new opportunities for scholarly work? Or let's say you're planning on going elsewhere for fellowship and you're concerned that you may not finish something before you leave. How do you navigate that process?
Josh, do you mean once you go from residency to fellowship?
So I think let's say once you've submitted your application, like this upcoming year, you're going into your last year of residency, should you be actively trying to get on new research projects or engage in new scholarly work?
So my opinion is it sort of depends on what your goals are. If you're doing it just to check a box, research is really hard. And when I mean research actually have a manuscript, not to have a poster at a conference. So research is really hard. And if you're not, passionate about something, a lot of folks on this call may know I'm passionate about throwing athletes. So I like baseball, I like softball. It'd be really tough for me to do another sport I'm not passionate about well, for those of you who aren't aware, all the steps that take to go through the whole process, it can take 12 to 24 months or longer. So if you're passionate about something, or you're looking to learn how to go through the clinical research process, unless you're an MD, PhD, or DO PhD, I would say it's important. And also because, until you finish fellowship, you're going to be doing something academic. You may end up in private practice, as a good portion of folks do. But I think it's important to understand all aspects of quote unquote sports medicine. That does involve, learning something beyond what you may see in clinic or on the field of play. So
right now, but if he looks bad, I'm fine with putting him like on a lead or half a lead or something like that. More to.
But my opinion would be, you have to, unless you're voluntold to do it, which very well may happen. But if there's an opportunity and it's something you're truly interested in, like if you love running and you got an opportunity to help with something on stress fractures, go for it. See what you can do. I mean, my very first project I did as a med student was learning how to write a review and Excel data mining. And now I can do that in my sleep because I learned how to do it. So there's a reason for doing some of that work, but that's just my opinion. But you have to be passionate about research. Otherwise, you're just not gonna be able to do it.
And I think to build off something that I think Jackie had said before, it's also an opportunity between when you submitted your application to when you're kind of talking on interviews. If you feel like, and honestly, just before your fellowship in general, this is a time to build skills. So again, if you have been on multiple research projects, but you've never written an IRB before, I think there can be value in doing that before you're a fellow or before you're faculty. So also kind of viewing it definitely as interest, but also as kind of ways to fill the gaps in your own knowledge base and experience base before fellowship and faculty positions.
And something to tag on to, and also kind of in relation to a question that just popped up on the chat, but about listing things that are in process or kind of anticipated. Sometimes you can do things like that also in that personal statement. That's a place where you might highlight some of those things that you're working on or working towards. I think that is a place. I think that you can list things as anticipated at times, or, but bring that stuff into your applications, even if it's not going to be perfectly complete by the end.
All very, very helpful tips. If there's not any other comments, we'll go ahead and keep moving forward here. So as we get to the interview, and I'd be curious, particularly from the incoming fellows, as you started to navigate the virtual interview process, at least from what it sounds like it's going to be more up to the individual program, but it sounds like maybe the consensus will be it'll be virtual again. What are some interview tips that you'd offer the next as we go through this next process? What would you offer us for some virtual interview tips?
I would say that a trial run is always good. So I think with anything virtual, it's nice to be able to go to the place around the time when you would be interviewing and see kind of, I know one thing I learned in the middle of the interview process was that they were doing drilling outside my building. So I ended up doing it in the hospital instead. So I think just being aware of those things that could kind of get in the way. I think in general, people are really understanding, but it can be helpful. And I think you'll feel better if you are aware of the space that you're going to be using, around what time you're going to be using it, and that there's sufficient lighting and all of that stuff, just so that the environment is not something that's stressing you out and you're able to actually focus on the interview day.
Yeah, I 100% agree with Brooke. Just having your setup ready, testing it out, making sure that you have a solid internet connection, because the last thing you want is to like cut out in the middle of an interview. There are a few resources online if you search like virtual interview tips that I thought were really helpful to just look through. Most of them are from right when the pandemic first started and stuff, but just kind of taking a look at some of those resources and practicing just like you would for an in-person interview, I think is really helpful.
One thing I was going to add is something I feel like that kind of helps applicants with the virtual interview is a lot of times I feel like during residency, when I would show up like an in-person interview, you get your itinerary the day of, like as soon as you get there, they give you the itinerary, you go through it. Whereas the virtual interview, a lot of times they're giving you the itinerary like a week ahead of time, because you have to get everything in situation to see who you're interviewing at this time, all of that. So you get your interviewers' names ahead of time, which is nice because you can, Google or read up on whether it's the research that whoever you're interviewing with has been doing, or something that you can find that is in common or what their background is. So I think the virtual interview, at least in my experience, I thought helped for me to prepare for the interviews, because I had a lot of the interviewers' names ahead of time. Whereas like when I was in person, you'd show up the day of at 8 a.m. and they'd give you the list of everybody you were interviewing with that day.
The structure for pretty much every interview I had was kind of like a round robin of 20 minutes with like 5 or 6 different people. Which I didn't love because I felt like it got repetitive and then it ended before you were like kind of ready for it to end. But tips in terms of that was I would be ready to be interviewed by someone who's not actually asking you questions, but is more wanting to answer your questions. So I would be ready to rapid fire off tons of questions, because you don't know like when the next chance you'll get to have those questions answered. A lot of them go pretty quick. But otherwise, a lot of repeat questions of just like, why are you going into fellowship, kind of future plans in the next 5 years. By the third interview, you'll be doing those in your sleep.
I guess the only other thing that I had to add was that oftentimes thinking about the round robin with like 20 minutes with each people, sometimes you would get cut off in the middle of your interview. So just like paying attention to the time that you have left so that you could kind of wind down the interview. And when you get cut off, sometimes you get thrown right into another room. So you have to be ready to like reset and start all over with a new group, which can be kind of challenging, but you get used to it kind of toward the end of the interview process. So just like be aware of that when you're starting your first interview, because it can kind of be a little bit frightening at first when you're like just thrown into another room.
To answer the second question about how important the interview is, I'll reference a paper from CJSM that Dr. Zaremski actually was the first author on, called Identifiable Factors Associated with Acceptance into Sports Med Fellowship Programs. This has been referenced in past AMSSM fellowship things, but basically for the study, they interviewed fellowship directors and asked them to rank certain aspects of the application process. And hands down, the most important thing was the interview. So I think these questions are super relevant. Of course, I think the survey was done before things went virtual, but I think we can assume that the interview is still the most important thing. And as far as like a tip that I would give is that it's awkward for everyone, both the interviewers and the interviewees. And I think that not being afraid to take the initiative and do a simple icebreaker of like, hey, nice to meet you. Thank you for taking the time to interview me, goes a long way. Because as we all know, after being on Zoom for the last 2 years, the most awkward thing is when no one speaks up first and everyone's kind of waiting to see who will speak up. And so I found that that was a nice way to get things going.
One thing I might suggest, and I don't know if any of the incoming fellows did this, but when you're interviewing, particularly because it's virtual, or most programs will probably be virtual again this year, is definitely make sure you've researched the program. So when interviewers ask you, why do you want to come to program X? And you're like, oh, I really want to cover college sports, or I really give us something specific. I have found not necessarily the best candidates, but the most engaging interviews on Zoom or virtual are those candidates that are excited. They're not just speaking very monotone, But the other is that maybe they've looked some stuff up. That maybe they go to PubMed and look up the 5 attendings or faculty that they're interviewing with that day and see, you know, this person did throwing, this person does nutrition, this one did transgender, whatever. And if there's something that there's an interest you have going, hey, I saw that you wrote this in 2019. I'm truly interested in this. How'd you get started in this? And you don't want to do it like you're a car salesman trying to kiss someone's butt. It's more that you're truly interested. And to us, that shows that you did some form of your due diligence and went a little bit deeper than just looking at the website. So that would be my suggestion, particularly when it's a virtual interview.
Yeah, I'm gonna actually blow some smoke for Jason here a little bit on 2 things. One, the interview process, you know, for me as a residency or a fellowship director, is the biggest thing. I want to make sure that you're personable. I want to make sure that you have the ability to kind of develop relationships and do those kind of things. But I also want to echo the fact to just do your research. Having the ability to do these interviews remotely has made it so you can interview at a lot of different places. It doesn't cost us quite as much. We don't have to fly here. We don't have to fly here. So I've gotten a lot more people to interview our program, but I've also gotten people that have no idea what our program's about. Okay. So if you're getting on an interview, you don't know anything, you don't know where Cincinnati is, and you're talking about the University of Cincinnati, that's a little bit of a problem. So just kind of get your research, get things done, learn a little bit about the faculty. If you come to Cincinnati and you don't know who John Devine is, then you didn't look through past presidents of the AMSSM, right? So those are the kind of things that you need to kind of look at.
And I think one resource that can be helpful with the virtual is when you do have an opportunity to talk with people in person or over the phone beforehand or even after your interviews, that can be so helpful. I know I met a lot of current fellows while doing some of the the marathon coverage events in the fall. And I think that can be a great opportunity to kind of hear more about the program than what you might be able to read online.
I guess the last thing I would add on that, that speaks to some of the points made, is that with things going virtual, there are a lot of people who interview at a lot more programs. And so you really want to express your sincere interest in the programs you want to be at, because before, if you're taking the time and spending that money to travel and come out to interview, then you can already get a sense there's a little bit more interest in that program because you're going to be a little bit more limited by your resources. And so without that limitation, it's a little tougher for, I think, us as directors to gauge that with all of the applicants. So if you're really interested in a program, it doesn't hurt to follow up or send a quick, thank you, really appreciate it. You guys are a program that I'm strongly interested in. It's a little more difficult virtually to pick up on some of those cues.
Thank you all. Really, yeah, those are all very, very helpful tips, and that's great insight. Just in the interest of time, we'll keep moving forward here. Now, this next batch of questions is going to be a little bit more. It's not a great category per se, so just these are more general. And I think for these, just in the interest of time, we'll probably have one person respond for these here. But when we think about how many programs to apply to, what would you recommend? And maybe this varies based on primary specialty. So, any thoughts on that? And or if any of the fellows want to comment, or incoming fellows want to comment on how many programs they applied to, and if they thought that was too much, too little.
I guess I can answer this question. I applied to 18 programs. I heard from other co-residents that they applied anywhere from like that 18 range up to like 20 or 30 programs. I think that's a personal question, and it really depends on your specialty and, the area of interest that you have as far as like geographically too. But yeah, I think that's kind of a tough question to answer, and it's probably individual for people.
I can answer. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Jackie.
No, that's okay. And like to reflect also on the fact that I think that people are interviewing at a lot of programs. because of the virtual platforms and things like that. And so I think that like the answer that I would have given 5 years ago to that question is likely different than the answer that our current fellows and incoming fellows would say that the answer is now. And so I think it is very much a personal decision.
I was going to say with respect to your letter writers, so number one, some programs will ask for 3 and some programs will ask for 4 and some programs will say at least 3. So I do think it's important you pay attention because various programs will be different. That's number one. Number two, if you think about it, you're going to have your chairperson and you're going to have your program director. So there's a 2 right there. So you have 1 to 2 letters remaining. I would strongly recommend at least one of those be a sports medicine physician of some sort, because you're entering your goal is to matriculate into a sports medicine fellowship. If none of your letters are from an individual that quote unquote practices sports medicine, that might be a little bit of a red flag. That's also something that was referenced in the manuscript that was put into the chat also, and that data is from 2017, but that's what program directors and core fellowship faculty would say. And as an example, again, just because I know Casey real well, if I have a candidate at University of Florida that's applying to his program and none of our 13 CAQ trained physicians at UF wrote a letter, he's going to send me an email going, what's up with this guy? And be like, I don't know. He never rotated with us. That's a big red flag. So that's how I would recommend doing it. But if you're remaining 1 or 2, especially if there's 2, 1 better be a sports medicine physician, in my opinion.
All very helpful. And so what about so for the program directors, when you think about the qualities that your past fellows have had that really stand out to you, what are some of those qualities that really make a good fellow? And so I'm specifically thinking about, let's say your top 5 to 10% of fellows, what made those fellows stand out to you?
I'll take this, Casey from Los Angeles. I think there's really 3 qualities. You know, when I look at fellows coming in, like we said, they could come in with a lot of experience or little experience. And some of the best fellows I've had have come in with little experience. And really what I think is being successful is seeing how they grow from the beginning to the end. And how do you do that? One is you have to be hardworking. You know, you have to be really interested in sports medicine. You have to put in a lot of work. That'd be number 1, is just be a hard worker. Number 2 is be an active learner. You know, you don't want to be necessarily annoying with, you know, and ask 1,000 questions every patient you see, but you know, every few patients or at the end of the day, you should be asking your attendings or your athletic trainers or whoever you're working with that day, you know, some poignant questions about the things you saw, and should be taking away some tidbits from, you know, every encounter every day. So being an active learner. Number 3 is you just got to be trainable. You know, I mean, it seems common sense, but really being able to work as part of a team, having some humility, you know, being able to take criticism, not being overly sensitive, and just be trainable and realize there's some stuff, you know, you may not know as much as you think you know. And it's okay to show what you do know. I mean, I think that's great. I mean, I expect to be taught by my fellows as well. And it's not just a one-way street of us down to the fellows. So I think for me, the 3 biggest things that I really look for and that's been successful is really hardworking, active learner, and being trainable.
Yeah, those are great. Those are great. Really, really appreciate you sharing those.
And Josh, really quick, I was just going to add the one quality that I think kind of encompasses all of the above, everything that Casey said, is really enthusiasm. And so we have to remember most fellowships are a year. In the case of my fellowship, there's a 2-year component, but the breadth of information that a sports medicine fellow needs to learn during that period of time is really, really daunting. And so what we're looking for, and the thing that stands out to me, is somebody that is enthusiastic, engaging, really is excited, wants to seize every opportunity possible to learn. That's the most spectacular fellows that end up coming through.
Oh, great. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for sharing.
Hey, Josh, I'll just chime in. I think I agree with what's been mentioned, but another characteristic that I think about in our best fellows was just, looking for feedback regularly. And also, there's just a balance between having some confidence, but, also having some humility. So, if you're going to be going to a new place, potentially, you want to show what you know, but at the same time, be willing to kind of learn a new way as well. And so that's not just with the physicians, but, the athletic trainers and the support staff that you're working with.
That's great. Yeah. Well, thank you each for sharing that. Those are all very helpful tips. I think we'll all benefit from hearing that. Just working down the list here. So as you think about, applying for fellowship, who would recommend going to another program for fellowship rather than from where we train for residency? What are the pros and cons of doing so? And I know this might be again an individual question, but I imagine there's two camps here, and so I'd be curious to hear why someone would be in favor of going elsewhere or in favor of staying at the same institution you train for residency.
Yeah, I can speak on that a little bit. So I trained down at the University of Florida. Dr. Zarinsky was one of my attendings. And I feel like there's definitely some value in having multiple experiences because you get to see, how Dr. Zarinsky performs a certain procedure. You get to see how one of your new attendings performs a certain procedure. Certainly there are some negatives. I spent the first 2 months of fellowship trying to learn the EMR and the new system and all that kind of stuff. So I really think the more important thing, other than staying somewhere or going somewhere, is really just making sure that you're going to have diverse experiences with multiple attendings. So you can certainly do that at the same program that you're at, but just make sure that you're not just exposed to one way to do things. That'd be my advice.
And I want to kind of chime in on from both standpoints. One, as a fellowship director, I spent a lot of time working with residents that are interns, second years, third years, or whatever, getting them involved in their sports medicine through the residency program, whether it's emergency medicine, PM&R, family medicine. So that in-house type of candidate that we had, we know that, trying to get everything that you need to learn in a sports medicine standpoint in a one-year fellowship program is very difficult. We've had up to 1,000 conversations on increasing the time frame of our fellowship. But, I like in-house candidates because we're continuing to work. And as they get to be the second year or third year or fourth year in emergency medicine, they have a lot more autonomy. They come in fellow, they know what's going on. But they're learning how I'm doing it, how Dr. Devine's doing it, how my other faculty, our 6 faculty, are doing it. And it does sometimes limit them, from going to Vanderbilt, going down to Florida, going up to Notre Dame, going up to Mayo. There's different ways to do it. So like I said, it's as a fellowship director, I like that in-house candidate because I've spent 2 to 3 years working with them, and that fellowship year is great because they've really got to a point that they're working autonomously from an early standpoint in their fellowship. So, like I said, but I understand, you don't want to get inbred, so to speak, and you want to see different things and how things go. So, that's all going to be a personal, priority on each individual fellow.
Yeah, I think that it's interesting as a fellowship director, and as I also work with 2 residency programs, and I spend a lot of time with the residents, helping build applications. I don't have enough spots in my fellowship to take every resident that I train to go into sports medicine fellowship. And so my goal is always that resident's ready to go wherever they want to go, whether that's my program or others. Now, if they come to my program, there's a huge advantage in the sense of I know where they stand. I know, they may get up to speed a little bit faster doing ultrasound or doing, procedures that they've done with me in the past. That being said, I did my residency in South Bend and I did my fellowship in Toledo. And so I know from experience, I love having two groups of sports medicine kind of mentors that I get to bounce ideas off of and talk to and things like that. So I very much appreciate kind of having two sets of people, and that's a lot of fun. And so you're always building that circle of kind of colleagues and mentors and friends. And I think that, it does widen your circle when you do step away from your residency training program.
Okay, well, that's all very helpful comments. There are some other questions here, but just in the interest of time, I want to make sure that we leave time for the questions in the chat. So we'll go ahead and keep moving forward here. So I'll go ahead and open up the chat, and it looks as though there's a large amount of questions in here. But so as I'm looking through this, if somebody in the audience that had put one of these questions, you want to unmute yourself and ask the question, please feel free to do so.
I'll start it off. Hello, everyone. My name is Mohammed, currently the communications representative here. Can you hear me okay, Josh?
Yes, you're good. Perfect. To go.
Perfect. So like I mentioned in the chat, some of us, we're passionate about, advocating for private practice physicians and clinics all around the nation. And sometimes when we get asked, like, what are your goals in 5 years, or what do you see yourself most passionate about, or something of that nature, even if you want to go into academics, is that something to kind of avoid as a topic during interviews, or is that something that you should probably relay?
One thing that I would say, at least at the program and the institution I'm at, is, why do you want to go to our program? And at our program, the goal is to be able to train you to be a team physician. So our concern typically is if someone says, I want to learn more about musculoskeletal medicine, that doesn't really cut it. So whether you say you want to go into private practice, you want to be a academic, collegiate team physician, or everywhere in between, at least where I practice, that's not as much a concern as much as we just want to make sure, is there a fit, and can we make sure that, we're going to be providing you with the opportunities to get you where you want to go. But I don't, my personal opinion is I don't think that matters quite as much as, are you a fit for what our fellowship goals are? And again, some programs may be more procedural, some may be becoming a very good team physician, some may be more of a pure primary care for the community, some are more at upper level or advanced level athletics. It just sort of depends. But that would be my take on it. Obviously curious and what the other folks in the panelists think. And that's obviously going to change. There's only 7 or 9 of us on this panel. That's going to be different for every single program. So I think ultimately what's best is be yourself and be honest and true to what you want to do. But you got to be able to explain why you want to do the fellowship and not as much worry about the job in 5 years.
Yeah, I would say, we really want you to be your authentic self. We want to know who you are as a person and see if that's a fit. But to Jason's point, there's so much variation from fellowship to fellowship and what each fellowship's strength and weakness is. It would be worth your pursuit of trying to figure out some of that early on in your process to decide on where you're sending out applications, what programs you want to interview at, because you might be able to find out, hey, Florida might not be a good fit based on knowing, hey, they're trying to train team physicians in this way. There's some other things that I want to do on top of that. There may be a better fit out there. So I think knowing that about yourself and being able to narrow it down, you might be able to find out that information. Otherwise, it's a great talking point on an interview to say, hey, not only do I want to do this in sports medicine, these are some other things I'm passionate about. Are there opportunities at your program for me to, go down that path?
And Mohammed, what I was going to mention is just giving the kind of academic perspective, because we like to market ourselves as an academic program. But what I will tell you is that a significant portion of our graduates go into private practice. And so you having a goal of being in private practice is absolutely a wonderful and an acceptable goal. What we look for is we look for academic-minded physicians. So when you go out into private practice, are you going to be confident in reading the literature and understanding and reviewing the literature to help make your clinical decisions in the future? Are you going to be involved in the community? Are you going to be leaders within sports medicine? These are the kind of skills that people term academic that really is applicable in multiple different settings. And so that is the kind of focus that I would bring up when you're talking to different programs.
Got you guys. Thank you all so much.
So it looks like a few questions were asked about the importance of away rotations in part of the regarding the whole application. So any thoughts on that? It seems, I know there was some comment on that already in the chat, but any other thoughts about where that weighs relative to the whole application?
I'll take that question. I mean, for us, it's pretty easy. We don't allow any outside rotators. We just want to focus on our fellows and actually not give anybody a leg up or leg down. So just for fairness between our primary care sports medicine and the orthopedic fellowships, we don't allow outside rotations. So for my programs, it's a little bit moot. When I was at the UC Berkeley Davis program before Curl and Joe, we did occasionally take them. It's high risk, high reward, I suppose. I don't put a whole lot of stock into outside rotations, but if it's, that's kind of all I have to say about that. I don't read too much into it.
To build off what Casey said, I think it is that high risk, high reward. If you go and you make a really great impression and you really click with the people that are there, it can be very beneficial. But if things don't go the way that you would like, or you don't have that, if you don't have that great experience, sometimes it can work against you. So from my standpoint, I would weigh an interview higher than I likely would weigh the away rotation, because we also understand that not everyone has the opportunities to do that. And, I take a couple away rotators a year and that's about it. And I can't really take much more than that because of my home residency programs and making sure we get them experiences. So, it can be something, if you're looking at a program and want to get more information about it, it may be helpful to you as well. But, or as a way to really express your interest.
So just continuing to move forward here, how do you view thank you letters, thank you notes, or even communication prior to an interview and then after the interview process? Do you view that favorably? And if so, do you like that to be communicated to you directly, or do you like that to be sent to your program coordinators?
I can tell you that, and this is going to be very programized or individualized. Our emails are given out if you end up interviewing with us. So it's nice to get a short email. And what I usually do is say, thanks so much, good luck on the interview trail, because technically and ethically, we shouldn't be saying more than that. And then what I do, I just hit forward and send it to our program administrator. So it goes into his or her file. And when we rank people, we do have a little column that says, send a thank you to somebody, so that is a nice thing. It's kind of like the cherry on top. So I just think it's good business practice. And it's just kind of a nice thing to do. And since most stuff is now electronic, it takes you all about 17 seconds. I would at least do it to one of the faculty they interview with at a particular program, in my opinion.
As for the pre-interview or interview communication, as for like an emergency medicine background, there's some programs that don't take emergency medicine applicants, and sometimes it's hard to go through the site and see have they taken one before. So there were programs I had emailed. I saw the program coordinator's email on the thing and said, hi, I'm interested in sports medicine. I'm applying next year. I wanted to learn more about your program. Have you taken an emergency medicine resident in the past, or are you able to take emergency medicine applicants? Because some programs just don't have the foundation to take an emergency medicine applicant. And I would say mostly everybody that I had emailed beforehand were very kind and answered all my emails and was like, oh no, we haven't had one in the past, but we're open to taking one, or no, we don't take emergency medicine applicants. And I think most of them responded. I guess I'm not on the other end of it, but I didn't get any negative feedback from reaching out to anybody beforehand.
That's a good point. I would say for those types of questions, probably address those to the coordinators if their information's available rather than a program director. I think that's probably more appropriate. You're more likely to get a rapid response.
Hello, this is Jerry, one of the current sports fellows, and I just wanted to piggyback on kind of what was said about communicating with programs beforehand. In a different direction, one thing that I would highly recommend is reaching out to previous fellows at an institution. I don't know if this was already discussed, I got on kind of late, but if you can reach out to prior fellows and get their sort of sense of what do they like about the program, what was good, what was bad, and you sort of take that into your interview. I did that when I interviewed across the board, and I think that shows again your interest, and then you're able to talk more about the program and mention, oh, I spoke with your fellow 2 years ago, he or she said this and that, and I think that again is helpful across the board.
And just as a program director at an emergency-based primary care sports medicine fellowship, I think that reaching out beforehand and just kind of making sure that they have the capability to do what we need to do from an emergency medicine standpoint, continuity of care. We said there's a lot of fellowships that will list that they take emergency physicians, but they've maybe taken one, they've maybe not taken any. They don't really have the infrastructure to deal with the continuity of care in emergency medicine. So I think that's completely, you need to really kind of do that, because I think there's only 7 now, maybe 8 primary care sports medicine fellowships that are actually housed in the Department of Emergency Medicine. So like I said, obviously UC will take emergency physicians because that's what we're geared to, but a lot of places aren't. So for those emergency physicians on there, really look at that, make sure that you're going to get a fair shake when you get there.
Well, first of all, I want to thank each of the panelists for their time this evening. And I also want to thank all the people in the audience who attended this session. And for those of you who are going to watch this session later on the AMSSM YouTube channel. If there's any other final takeaways from the panelists, please go ahead and say, leave us with any parting thoughts, but otherwise I want to respect everyone's time. So we're a few minutes over. And so if there's any other last parting thoughts you want to share with us, please do so. Otherwise, we'll go ahead and conclude here in the next minute or so. And then I realize that there are also some questions in the chat that we didn't get to, and I apologize about that. I put my email in the chat, and so if there's any questions that are still remaining, feel free to email me, and I'll try to work with some of the other officers, and we'll try to get those questions answered for you and sent back. All right, well, thank you all for your time. Really appreciate it and appreciate the enthusiasm. And I imagine speak for everyone else, will probably make sure that we're really grateful for all of your advice and your insight this year. And we're excited to move forward here. Well, thank you all. Have a good evening. And I'm sure we'll all be crossing paths soon. Take care.